Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. Today, we're diving into something pretty fundamental. Research funding. How it works, and maybe, just maybe, if there's a smarter way to go about it.
It's a big question.
For decades, the way it's mostly been done is merit-based funding. The research proposals that get the best scores from reviewers. They get the cash. Mm-hmm. Seems fair, right?
It certainly has that intuitive logic to it. You want to back the best ideas, the highest quality science.
And it's led to discoveries, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That system has funded a huge amount of important work.
But the question we're digging into today is just ranking proposals by themselves, by their individual merit, really the best way? Could we be missing a bigger picture?
That's exactly it. We're going to explore this really interesting alternative idea that borrows from finance, portfolio theory.
Ah, okay. Like with investing.
Precisely. You don't just pick the one stock you think is hottest. You build a diversified portfolio, right? To manage risk, maximize your overall return.
Right. Spread things out.
So the idea is, can we apply that same kind of strategic thinking to deciding which research gets funded?
Okay, so instead of just focusing on how brilliant, say, one proposal is,
you look at the whole collection, the whole portfolio of projects you're funding. What are their combined strengths, their weaknesses? How do they fit together?
Got it. So our mission today is to really unpack this portfolio idea, see why it might be potentially a more powerful way to use research funding, and also try to understand why the old way, the merit-based system, is still so, dominant.
Yeah, why does it stick around if there might be better options?
We've got some great material, including a really thought-provoking research paper on this. And for you listening, this is a chance to get a solid handle on a really key issue, maybe connect some dots. Okay, let's start with the current system. Merit-based funding. What's the nitty-gritty?
Well, in essence, it's pretty straightforward. Researchers send in their proposals.
Right.
Panels of experts, peer reviewers, they evaluate them based on certain criteria.
Set out in the call for proposals.
Exactly. They assign scores. Then it's basically a ranking exercise. Highest scores get funded first, down the list, until the budget runs out.
Seems logical. Reward the best ideas, judged by the experts in the field. But the paper we're looking at today suggests it's maybe not quite so perfect. What are the potential downsides they highlight?
Well, one big one is just how much it relies on those peer reviewers. I mean, they're experts, absolutely.
Sure.
But the review process isn't immune to bias. Things like gender bias, status bias, favoring well-known researchers or institutions, even ethnic bias. These can creep in, often unconsciously.
Right, we all have those filters, don't we? And what about measuring quality? Can you really pin down the quality of an idea before the research is done? Isn't it inherently a bit fuzzy?
It really is, and there's a lot of debate about that. You have researchers like Franzoni and Stefan who've tried to see if reviewers can assess the risk involved in a proposal.
Huh?
But then others, like Sterling, were quite cautious. He warns against this sort of misleading technocratic precision, thinking we can just slap a perfect number on something so uncertain.
Yeah, predicting the future is hard, especially in science. And it gets even messier because funding agencies often want more than just pure science points, right? They might look for societal impact or innovation.
Or diversity in the teams, yeah. Exactly. So when you have multiple goals, technical quality, originality, societal benefit, maybe diversity, the final score can get what the paper calls confounded, meaning it's not really clear which factor ended up driving the rank. Was it the novelty, the societal bit? It can lack transparency.
And the paper also mentioned something about risk aversion, that this system might favor safer bets.
That's a real concern. Peer reviewers, especially established ones, might lean towards proposals that fit the current mold, that come from labs they know. Those really out there, high-risk, high-reward ideas, they might struggle to get top marks.
The potential breakthroughs might get overlooked.
It's possible. As Weinberg pointed out way back in the 60s, merit alone is really only dominant in very narrow contexts. Usually, other things are playing a part.
Okay, so some clear potential limitations with the merit-based system. Let's switch gears then. This alternative, the portfolio approach, where did it come from again? Finance.
Yeah. The roots are definitely in finance. Harry Markowitz, back in the 1950s, won a Nobel for this work. His big idea was, don't just look at individual investments, look at the whole collection, the portfolio.
Diversification.
Exactly. Diversified to reduce your overall risk, potentially boost your overall returns by considering how different assets interact.
So how do you translate that from stocks and bonds to, research grants? What's the main shift?
The fundamental shift is you stop judging each proposal in isolation. You start looking at the combined features of the whole set of projects you decide to fund.
Not just a list of winners, but a curated collection.
Precisely. The aim isn't just picking individually great projects. It's about assembling a group of projects that together best achieve whatever your strategic goals are for research and innovation.
The paper uses a simple mathematical model to illustrate this. Can you walk us through that without making our heads spin?
I'll try. So imagine your main goal is getting the most total quality possible from the projects you fund. Let's call that total quality U.
Okay.
In the simple model, U is just the sum of the quality scores of the projects you choose to fund, X. So U equals X prime Q if you like the notation.
Right. Add up the scores of the funded ones.
But you have a limit your budget B. The total cost of the funded projects can't exceed B. So X prime B must be less than or equal to B. X is just a list of ones and zeros, ones if funded, 0 if not. Q is the list of quality scores, B is the list of costs.
Okay, maximize total quality within the budget. And the paper has that example with 10 proposals. How does that play out?
Right. So in their example, the budget is 100. The portfolio approach, which they call MP, picks projects 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10. Yeah. That combination gives a total quality score of 51 and spends 98 out of the 100 budget. Pretty efficient.
And how does that compare to just funding the top-ranked ones, the merit approach?
Well, a plausible merit-based outcome, might fund projects 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and maybe project 4 fits in the leftover budget too. So 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And the result?
The result there is a total quality of 47, and it only spends 87 of the budget. So a bit of money left over, but a lower overall quality score achieved.
Interesting. So the portfolio got a better score and used the budget more fully.
In this example, yes. But what's really crucial is which projects get funded. They're different sets. Projects 2 and 3 get money in the portfolio approach, but not merit. Project 9 gets money in merit, but not portfolio.
Which means funding could become less predictable for researchers, right? If it's not just about having the top score.
That's a really critical point, and the paper flags it as something needing more research. If researchers feel a great score isn't a guarantee, does that reduce motivation?
Or maybe it encourages different kinds of proposals.
Could be. We don't really know yet. It's definitely a potential consequence to think about.
Okay, so the portfolio approach can get more quality bang for the buck in that example. But the paper argues it's better in a more fundamental way. How does it make that case?
It shows mathematically that the merit-based outcome is actually like a restricted version of the portfolio model.
Restricted how?
You can think of the merit system as taking the portfolio model and adding extra rules, like you must fund rank 1 before rank 2 before rank 3, and so on, regardless of budget or how they fit together.
Okay. It forces a specific sequence based purely on rank.
Exactly. And those extra rules, those constraints, can either have no effect, meaning you get the same result as the flexible portfolio approach, or they can prevent you from reaching the best possible outcome, the highest total quality.
So the portfolio approach is inherently more flexible.
Yes. It has what the paper calls first-order dominance. It will always do at least as well as the merit approach in terms of maximizing the stated objective, like quality, and often better because it's not tied down by those ranking constraints. Appendix B digs into the maths of it.
And this also changes how you think about funding errors, doesn't it? Like funding the wrong project or missing a right one?
Totally. The paper talks about type 1 errors not funding a good project and type 2 errors funding a project you maybe shouldn't have.
Right.
So in that example, from the portfolio perspective, funding project 9, which had a lower score than 2 and 3, in the merit system might look like a type 2 error. But from a strict merit perspective, not funding project 9 and funding the lower ranked 2 and 3 instead could be seen as errors. It depends entirely on which model you think is right.
Okay, but we've been talking mostly about just maximizing quality. real-world research funding is way more complicated than that, isn't it? Multiple goals.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the portfolio approach gets really powerful. The basic model can be extended quite nicely.
How so?
Well, one key thing is recognizing that projects aren't always independent. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they actually help each other.
Like two teams tackling almost the same problem. That's substitutability, right?
Exactly. The model can be adjusted for that. If two projects are substitutes, funding both might give diminishing returns compared to funding two very different things.
Makes sense.
And the opposite is complementarity. That's when one project's success could really boost another one. The paper gives examples. Projects 2 and 10 are substitutes, 5 and 9 are complements, and shows how the optimal portfolio changes when you account for these interactions.
So you'd maybe avoid funding too many substitutes and actively look for projects that complement each other.
That would be the idea. Build a portfolio where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, potentially.
But figuring out those relationships in advance, wow, that sounds incredibly difficult. How do you quantify if Project A complements Project B?
Yeah, that's the practical challenge, no doubt. The paper admits quantifying it precisely is hard, but it suggests you could use expert judgment, maybe qualitative assessments to make adjustments. It doesn't have to be perfect numbers.
Okay.
And it also mentions in Appendix C, a more complex stochastic version that can even factor in risk and how project outcomes might correlate.
And what are those other goals we mentioned, like hitting sustainable development goals or getting industry involved, SMEs?
That's another major strength. The portfolio model can be generalized to handle multiple objectives. You don't just optimize for quality. You can track how well different potential portfolios perform on other dimensions.
So you add constraints, or how does that work?
In the paper's example, they treat these other goals, SDG, alignment, synergy, SME participation, as additional things to measure for each possible portfolio, rather than strict limits you must meet.
Okay, so you don't just get one perfect portfolio anymore.
Exactly. That's a key outcome. You generate a set of alternative options, different menus of funded projects. Table 2 in the paper shows this really well.
Let's look at that. What kinds of options does it show?
Well, you have M1, which is the one purely optimized for quality, like we discussed. Then M4 looks a lot like the merit-based outcome.
Okay.
But then you get interesting ones like M3. M3 scores highest on the SDG, synergy, and SME criteria, but its total quality score is lower, and it actually excludes some of the top-ranked projects.
So it shows the trade-off. If you really want to maximize those other goals, you might have to sacrifice some pure quality points.
Precisely. It makes the trade-offs explicit. Decision makers can see clearly, if we prioritize this, we gain here but might lose there. It allows for a much more informed strategic discussion about what the real priorities are.
That feels much more transparent than a single, potentially confusing score. But the paper stresses you need to decide on those criteria up front.
Absolutely critical. You need transparency about what you're optimizing for, what you're measuring. What does synergy mean in this context? How are we assessing SDG alignment? That needs to be defined clearly beforehand.
And it could be iterative. You see the options, realize you forgot something.
Yes, the paper suggests that. Maybe looking at the menus reveals a hidden preference, like geographic balance. You can then make that explicit, add it as another dimension, and recalculate the options.
And it could also handle things like wanting to ensure some moonshot projects get funded or promoting diverse approaches?
Potentially, yes. You could build in rules or categories to protect certain types of projects or ensure a mix of perspectives within the overall portfolio.
The paper mentions a classification by someone named Cheen, independent, interrelated, synergistic attributes. How does that fit in?
Yeah, Cheen's taxonomy is helpful. Scientific merit, the score of a single project, is an independent attribute.
Okay.
Things like whether projects substitute or complement each other or the overall risk, those are interrelated attributes. They depend on the mix. And things like SDG coverage or SME participation, those are synergistic attributes assessed at the level of the whole portfolio. The key point is that the traditional merit system really only handles that first type, the independent attribute. Well, it struggles with the interrelated and synergistic stuff.
Whereas the portfolio approach... Actually doing this, are there real-world examples?
Well, maybe not the full mathematical model everywhere, but the thinking is definitely out there. The paper mentions the NIH in the U.S. has an Office of Portfolio Analysis.
Okay.
UK Research and Innovation uses portfolio ideas for business innovation funding. And the European Innovation Council, especially their Pathfinder challenges, explicitly tries to build synergistic portfolios.
But maybe not purely quantitatively. Often a mix.
Often, yes. It's frequently more qualitative or a hybrid approach, still involving merit scores, but layering portfolio strategy on top.
Which brings us back to the big question. If it's so good, why is plain old merit-based funding still king? The paper talks about conventions.
Right. This uses ideas from institutional economics from Douglas North. Institutions aren't just formal rules. There are also informal constraints, norms, codes of conduct, how things are done.
Like traditions.
Kind of. The argument is that merit-based funding has become a really strong convention in the research world. It's the established norm, what people expect.
So it's not just about logic. It's about culture and expectation within science.
Exactly. Going against it might seem weird or unfair, or draw criticism from peers who believe strongly in rewarding individual excellence above all else. The paper links this back to the merit outcome being like a constrained portfolio. The institutional environment, the convention, adds those constraints.
And the paper's author actually surveyed policy people at the European Commission about this. What did they find?
Yeah, that survey is fascinating. First, they gave them a little puzzle, similar to the basic portfolio problem. A good chunk of them solved it correctly.
So they can think in portfolio terms.
The capacity seems to be there. But when asked which funding model they preferred, portfolio, merit, or a hybrid merit and hybrid came out on top overall. Pure merit wasn't overwhelmingly dominant, but it was strong.
But were there differences within the group? Like between those who solved the puzzle and those who didn't?
Yes, that was revealing. Those who actually solved the puzzle, who showed they understood portfolio thinking, had a clear preference for the portfolio approach itself.
Interesting. And what about where they worked in the commission? Did that matter?
It did. Practitioners working right inside the Directorate General for Research and Innovation, the RNIDG, the heart of research policy, showed a much stronger preference for the traditional merit-based funding compared to colleagues in other departments.
The club effect the paper mentions.
Potentially, yeah. It suggests that being deeply embedded in that research policy world reinforces the existing norms, the merit convention.
Makes sense. Familiarity breeds. Well, preference for the familiar. Any gender differences?
They looked at that too. There were some differences, but the paper says there wasn't a really clear, consistent pattern emerging from the data on gender.
Okay, so summing up this part, the survey suggests people can grasp portfolio logic, but the established system and maybe the culture around it create inertia.
That seems to be the implication, yes. There's also some statistical analysis, a probit regression, that gives some support to that club effect idea for the R&I folks, though the paper cautions the sample size was small.
Needs more research as always. So let's pull it all together. What's the final verdict from this deep dive? Should we ditch merit funding tomorrow?
The paper doesn't quite say that. It's more about recognizing the potential of the portfolio approach to make funding decisions better, more strategic.
By looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. By considering how projects connect, how they serve multiple goals, it offers a way to potentially get more overall impact from the limited research funds we have.
But it does mean letting go maybe of the apparent simplicity and predictability of just ranking things by score. That's a big shift.
It is a trade-off. You might gain strategic alignment and transparency about goals, but lose some predictability at the individual project level. The argument is that the gain in transparency and strategic focus could be worth it, especially as we tackle more complex problems.
And it might even be feasible with data we already have.
The paper suggests a basic version could likely be implemented using existing evaluation data. It's not necessarily about collecting vast amounts of new information, initially at least.
What about just using lotteries? That sometimes comes up as an alternative.
The paper touches on that. Lotteries might help reduce bias when scores are very close, but they don't really help with the strategic parts, managing synergies, balancing goals. That's where the portfolio approach seems more suited.
So what's the suggested next step? How do we figure out if this works in practice?
The paper proposes pilot exercises. Try it out alongside the current system in a real funding round. See what happens.
Learn by doing.
Exactly. Find out the practical hurdles. How do you best present these alternative menus to decision makers? Do people actually find the transparency useful? Gather that real-world feedback.
And this whole way of thinking, portfolio thinking, it's not just for research funding, is it?
Not at all. The paper concludes by saying these ideas could apply anywhere you're allocating limited resources to achieve complex, multiple goals. Regional development, international aid, even internal company budgets.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive today. Merit-based funding is the long-standing norm, the convention. But this portfolio approach offers a really compelling alternative lens.
It's about looking at the whole forest, not just the individual trees. Considering how projects fit together, how they contribute to bigger strategic aims, it's a potentially more powerful way to steer research investment.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener. As the challenges facing society get more complex, and the goals for research become more diverse, is it maybe time to evolve beyond just focusing on individual project scores?
Should we be embracing a more holistic, maybe more strategic, portfolio-driven approach to shape the future of innovation and discovery?
Definitely something to chew on. Think about how these different ways of allocating resources might play out in other areas, Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.
রিভাইজ অ্যান্ড রিসাবমিটে স্বাগতম। আমি প্যাভলভ।
আর আমি নিকিতা।
আজকে আমরা একটা বেশ ইন্টারেস্টিং গবেষণাপত্র নিয়ে কথা বলবো।
আচ্ছা, গবেষণা প্রকল্পের টাকা কোথা থেকে আসবে, মানে সেই ফান্ডিংয়ের সিদ্ধান্তগুলো কিভাবে নেওয়া হয়, এটা কিন্তু ভবিষ্যতের অনেক কিছুই ঠিক করে দেয়।
একদম।
আজ আমরা এই নিয়েই একটু গভীরভাবে আলোচনা করব। আমাদের হাতে একটা গবেষণাপত্র আছে, রিসার্চ পলিসি পেপারস, যেটা এই পুরো প্রক্রিয়াটা বিশ্লেষণ করেছে।
ঠিক।
আমাদের লক্ষ্য হলো ফান্ডিংয়ের যে বিভিন্ন মডেল আছে সেগুলো দেখা, আর কেন সবচেয়ে চালু মডেলটাই সবসময় সেরা নাও হতে পারে সেটা একটু বোঝা।
ঠিক বলেছেন। বিশেষ করে আজকাল তো গবেষণা বা ইনোভেশন পলিসির উদ্দেশ্য অনেক রকমের হয়ে গেছে, তাই না? যেমন ধরুন, সাস্টেনেবল ডেভেলপমেন্ট গোলস পূরণ করা বা অন্তর্ভুক্তিমূলক সমাজ তৈরি করা। এই প্রেক্ষিতে ফান্ডিংয়ের দুটো প্রধান মডেল নিয়ে কথা বলা জরুরি। একটা হলো মেধাভিত্তিক, মানে মেরিট বেসড মডেল।
হ্যাঁ, যেটা আমরা সচরাচর শুনে থাকি।
আর অন্যটা হলো পোর্টফোলিও বা পোর্টফোলিও মডেল।
আচ্ছা, তো সবচেয়ে চালু মডেল তো ওই মেধাভিত্তিকটাই, তাই না? মানে সহজ কথায়, যে রিসার্চ প্রপোজালগুলো সবচেয়ে বেশি স্কোর পায়
তারাই ফান্ডিং পায়।
হ্যাঁ, শুনতে তো বেশ সোজাসাপটা আর ন্যায্যই লাগে ব্যাপারটা, কিন্তু এর ভেতরে কি কিছু সমস্যাও আছে?
হ্যাঁ, মানে সমস্যা তো কিছু আছেই। যেমন ধরুন, এই পদ্ধতিতে অনেক সময় একটু বেশি সেফ খেলা হয়, মানে খুব নতুন বা পরীক্ষামূলক আইডিয়ার চেয়ে
পরিচিত নিরাপদ গবেষণাকে বেশি গুরুত্ব দেওয়া হয়, যাকে বলে ঝুঁকি বিমুখতা।
একদম, রিস্ক অ্যাভারশন যাকে বলে। আবার ধরুন, অনেক সময় দেখা যায় যারা বেশ পরিচিত বা প্রতিষ্ঠিত গবেষক, তাদের দিকে একটা পক্ষপাতিত্ব কাজ করে।
ও আচ্ছা, সেটা লিঙ্গ, স্ট্যাটাস বা জাতিগত কারণেও হতে পারে।
হ্যাঁ, হতে পারে। আর স্কোর দেওয়ার প্রক্রিয়াটা, সেটাও তো সবসময় 100% অবজেক্টিভ হয় না। ব্যক্তিগত বিচার বা বায়াস তো কিছুটা প্রভাব ফেলেই।
ঠিক।
আর যখন লক্ষ্য একাধিক থাকে, মানে একদিকে সেরা মানের সায়েন্স চাই, আবার অন্যদিকে তার সামাজিক প্রভাবও দেখতে চাই, তখন পুরো ব্যাপারটা আরও যেন কম স্বচ্ছ হয়ে যায়।
মানে মূল্যায়নকারীদের ওপর বেশ চাপ পড়ে যায় তাহলে।
অবশ্যই, অনেকগুলো জিনিস ব্যালেন্স করতে হয় তাদের।
তাহলে এর বিকল্প হিসেবেই কি ওই পোর্টফোলিও পদ্ধতির কথা আসছে, যেটা পেপারটায় বলা হয়েছে? ব্যাপারটা ঠিক কি শেয়ার বাজারে পোর্টফোলিও সাজানোর মতো?
ধারণা তো অনেকটা সেরকমই, তবে গবেষণার জন্য। এখানে শুধু প্রত্যেকটা প্রপোজালের নিজের স্কোরের উপর জোর না দিয়ে,
বরং পুরো সেটটার ওপর।
হ্যাঁ, মানে প্রপোজালগুলোর যে সম্মিলিত সেট, তার বৈশিষ্ট্যের উপর বেশি নজর দেওয়া হয়। মূল আইডিয়াটা হলো একটা নির্দিষ্ট বাজেট আর কিছু শর্তের মধ্যে থেকে এমন একটা প্রজেক্টের সেট বেছে নেওয়া,
যেটা একটা সামগ্রিক উদ্দেশ্যকে সবচেয়ে ভালোভাবে পূরণ করবে। সেটা হতে পারে সর্বোচ্চ কোয়ালিটি স্কোর বা অন্য কিছু।
একদম, কোয়ালিটি স্কোর তো বটেই, আবার একাধিক পলিসি গোলও থাকতে পারে। যেমন ধরুন, প্রজেক্টগুলোর মধ্যেকার সম্পর্কটা দেখা, কোনটা হয়তো অন্যটার পরিপূরক, কোনটা বিকল্প পথ দেখাচ্ছে।
মানে ডাইভার্সিফিকেশন আর কি, ঝুঁকির বৈচিত্র্য আনা।
ঠিক। আবার ধরুন, এসডিজিস পূরণ করা বা ছোট মাঝারি শিল্পের অংশগ্রহণ বাড়ানো বা দেশের বিভিন্ন অঞ্চলের সমান প্রতিনিধিত্ব নিশ্চিত করা, এই সব কিছুই কনসিডার করা যায়।
বাহ, এটা তো বেশ ইন্টারেস্টিং।
পেপারটা একটা উদাহরণও আছে, দেখানো হয়েছে কিভাবে এই পোর্টফোলিও পদ্ধতিতে হয়তো মেধাভিত্তিক পদ্ধতির চেয়েও বেশি মোট কোয়ালিটি স্কোর পাওয়া যেতে পারে। উদাহরণে 51 স্কোর বনাম 47।
ওহ, তার মানে সেরা স্কোরারদের কয়েকজনকে বাদ দিয়েও ওভারঅল বেটার রেজাল্ট আনা সম্ভব।
সম্ভব, বা হয়তো একই স্কোর রেখেও অন্যান্য লক্ষ্য যেমন ডাইভার্সিটি বা এসডিজিস পূরণ করা যায়। বিভিন্ন লক্ষ্যের মধ্যে যে একটা ট্রেড অফ থাকে,
কোনটা পেতে গেলে কোনটা ছাড়তে হয়,
হ্যাঁ, সেই ট্রেড অফগুলো এই পদ্ধতিতে বেশ পরিষ্কার হয়ে ওঠে।
তাহলে তো প্রশ্ন আসেই, যদি পোর্টফোলিও পদ্ধতি এত ভালো, এত সম্ভাবনাময়, তাহলে এটা ব্যাপকভাবে ব্যবহার হয় না কেন? কোথায় আটকে আছে ব্যাপারটা?
এটা একটা ভালো প্রশ্ন। একটা বড় কারণ হতে পারে শ্রেফ প্রথা, মানে কনভেনশনস, বা যাকে পেপারটায় বলা হচ্ছে ইনফর্মাল কনস্ট্রেন্টস।
মানে লোকে যা করে আসছে সেটাই করে যাওয়া, সমালোচনার ভয়ে।
অনেকটা তাই। সিদ্ধান্ত গ্রহণকারীরা হয়তো প্রতিষ্ঠিত নিয়ম, মানে ওই মেধাভিত্তিক পদ্ধতিতেই থাকতে চান। ভাবেন সর্বোচ্চ স্কোর পাওয়া প্রজেক্ট বাদ দিয়ে কম স্কোর পাওয়া কাউকে বাছলে হয়তো জবাবদিহি করতে সমস্যা হবে।
একটা সেফটি নেট।
পেপারটায় ইউরোপীয় কমিশনের কিছু কর্মকর্তার ওপর করা একটা সমীক্ষার কথাও বলা আছে। আর মজার ব্যাপার হলো
কি,
যারা সরাসরি এই রিসার্চ আর ইনোভেশন পলিসির সাথে যুক্ত, তারাই নাকি মেধাভিত্তিক পদ্ধতির বেশি ভক্ত। এটাকে বলা হচ্ছে ক্লাব এফেক্ট।
তাই নাকি? মানে যারা সিস্টেমটা চালান তারাই পরিবর্তনের পথে বাধা হয়ে দাঁড়াচ্ছেন কিছুটা, অজান্তেই হয়তো।
গবেষণাটা সেরকমই ইঙ্গিত দিচ্ছে। হতে পারে তারা এই নিয়ম বা প্রথাগুলোর মধ্যেই কাজ করতে অভ্যস্ত হয়ে গেছেন, বা এর দ্বারা বেশি প্রভাবিত। পরিবর্তন আনা তো সবসময় সহজ নয়।
আচ্ছা, তাহলে সারমর্মটা কি দাঁড়ালো? একদিকে আছে আমাদের পরিচিত, সহজে ব্যাখ্যা করা যায় এমন মেধাভিত্তিক পদ্ধতি, যার কিছু সমস্যা আমরা দেখলাম। আর অন্যদিকে আছে এই পোর্টফোলিও পদ্ধতি, যেটা হয়তো আরও ভালো ফল দিতে পারে, বিভিন্ন লক্ষ্য পূরণ করতে পারে, কিন্তু
প্রথা আর হয়তো পরিবর্তনের প্রতি কিছুটা অনীহার কারণে সেভাবে এগুচ্ছে না।
এই আলোচনাটা আমাদের কি বুঝতে সাহায্য করলো? আমার মনে হয় এটা আমাদের দেখায় যে ভবিষ্যতের গবেষণার পথটা কিভাবে তৈরি হচ্ছে, আর কেন কিছু দারুণ সম্ভাবনাময় আইডিয়া হয়তো ফান্ডিং পাচ্ছে না।
একদম। আর শেষ করার আগে একটা প্রশ্ন বা চিন্তার খোরাক রেখে যাই। দেখুন, আমরা বিশ্বজুড়ে কত জটিল সমস্যার সম্মুখীন হচ্ছে। জলবায়ু পরিবর্তন, স্বাস্থ্য সংকট, সামাজিক বৈষম্য।
ঠিক।
এই সব কিছুর মোকাবেলার জন্য তো যুগান্তকারী, মানে ট্রান্সফরমেটিভ রিসার্চ দরকার। তো এই অবস্থায় আমরা কি শুধু পুরনো প্রথায় আটকে থেকে বা সমালোচনার ভয়ে নতুন আরও কার্যকর ফান্ডিং মডেল ব্যবহার না করে আসলে পিছিয়ে পড়ছি?
মানে আমরা কি সেরা সমাধানগুলো খুঁজে পাওয়ার সুযোগটা হাতছাড়া করছি?
সেটাই প্রশ্ন। পেপারটা তো এই ইঙ্গিতই দিচ্ছে যে যদি আমরা সত্যি এমন গবেষণা নীতি চাই যা সমাজে বড়সড় পরিবর্তন আনতে পারে, তাহলে ফান্ডিংয়ের এই গতানুগতিক পদ্ধতির বাইরে গিয়ে নতুন কিছু ভাবার, নতুন কিছু করার সময় শায়দ এসে গেছে।